Well, this is my piece, Raindrops, and this piece is watercolor on watercolor paper. It's also mounted with wire and on wood to come off the wall. And just to tell you a little bit about this piece actually I worked on so that I could get familiar with watercolor a little bit more. I used my grandmother's watercolors that she used before she passed, and so there's about a 10-year gap between when she used them and when I used them. So each of these pieces is an individual piece, but together they make an individual piece as well. Each of them are a thought process where I just allowed my self-conscious to just go. I started with just a wash of color, and I did some images and things like that. Sometimes I added some pen, but most of the time I just would add some more watercolor. So each of these pieces were mounted this way because I'm a sculptor, and this is the way a sculptor will frame a two-dimensional piece of art in 3 dimensions. So I wanted the raindrops, the idea of these ideas coming from me to float as they do in my head. So the colors and the shimmering, this all brings about the way my thought process works. So you see some similar themes throughout. You see heads and people and certain designs and whatnot. So there are some repeating elements, but I tried to just let my brain go, just let it do what it needed to do.
A lot of my work is about the replacement of our natural relationship with nature. And I do so in a way that involves our new relationship with the world, which is consumerism, buying things via the internet, and all the packaging material that goes along with it. So with these 2 pieces, the concrete pieces, they are void of color except for the plants involved, which is not the way we view these products or these packaging materials. Our relationship with color as hunter-gatherers has been replaced with color design and color science to trick us into buying things. So in this piece, it was formed with a bunch of packaging material, mainly styrofoam, and then concrete, which is statistically on the rise in the world and is bad for the environment. So I paired it with a horticultural plant that is considered a garbage plant, because a lot of these materials are garbage and or recycling. And the other piece is made primarily with cardboard food boxes, and I do like a free-form building technique to make a cardboard mold that I then pour concrete into. And it again has a different garbage plant that blah 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 plant people don't really like. It's like the mother of millions. I don't know the exact scientific name, but yeah. So in that piece, the only real fine art material is the tip, and it's a aluminum casting, and the rest of it is concrete casting, packaging material.
Okay, this is a piece called The Blue Precipice, and in these paintings, what I'm doing is I'm using the medium of acrylic to create various textures, which are, and the paintings are influenced by my love of this American Southwest, southwestern landscape. And these paintings in particular are influenced by the area around Santa Fe and Taos, the Rio Grande Gorge area. And I chose it not only for the reason that I love that area and that the landscape is incredible, and the textures, colors, and the shapes that you find there are very impressive. But also, there's another reason behind these paintings, and the idea of these being precipices, and that our present situation, in many ways, we find ourselves on the precipice. And so they're symbolic of that as well. So I'm combining both those interests into the paintings. The textures are created with a variety of media, texture gels, and fluid acrylics, pumice gel, all kinds of things in order to give it a surface. And one of the things that I do love about New Mexico is the richness of the textures that you find out there. Also the layers and strata of rock. There's just no matter what color you pick, it's there. It's in that landscape. So that's why they are what they are.
These pieces developed because a friend of mine said, my mother makes yo-yos, and that's what these little individual things are known as. They're known as fabric yo-yos in the States. In England, they're called Suffolk Huffs, and that's where they originated. And it's just this little modular thing that I can pretty much make wherever I am by the bucketful, and then arrange and put together however I want, which is new for me. This is an experiment. I usually draw and that kind of thing, but I've decided to do these because I want to make big things. And so this is one kind of an homage or a Go Girls kind of thing where it's the feminist movements, starting with the suffragists who wanted the vote in the early 1900s, all the way to, if you look at the front of it, it's the Guerrilla Girls, who are this artistic group in New York, and they're very in-your-face kind of feminist. They wear gorilla masks, so you don't know who they really are. And the most recent, as I see it anyway, feminist movement to come about is right after the most recent presidential election. Women showed up by the thousands in Washington, D.C. wearing these little pink pussy hats. And so that's what these pink yo-yos stand for in this particular piece, how this is a whole kind of a history of the feminist movement beginning again with the suffragists. So I wanted to kind of do that. And that's another new element in my work, is they're much more political than they have been in the past. And I guess I'm at the age now where who cares? I'm an old lady and I can say whatever I want, and so I am, and without reservation. So I wish I could have been there for the Pink Pussy Hat March. So that's what this particular piece is about. The other pieces, there's one called Chocolates with Friends, and that's the brown piece. And I had my friends eat a couple of boxes of chocolate with me and told them to save the wrappers, and they were like, oh, we can do that. And so we ate chocolate, and I saved the wrappers and made art. The red and black piece is about the Middle East, and it's about oil and blood, and I think that's really what the Middle East is about. I don't think it's about religion. I don't think it's about faith. I think it's about power, and it's causing a lot of havoc in innocent lives, and so I think it's really just all about oil and blood, actually, in my opinion anyway. And then finally the last piece on the end is called Lost. It's just one little yo-yo all lost by itself, and I think perhaps a lot of us do feel lost and maybe off-center lately, and we're trying to find that center again and ground ourselves because there's been a lot of big changes recently in our American landscape and across the world, actually. And I think that's a good thing. It's frightening and it causes a bit of anxiety, but I think change can be a good thing. So those are what my pieces are about. They're a lot more political than they've ever been before, and I'm experimenting with this little yo-yo thing, and of course I have 1,000 ideas, and hopefully they'll come to fruition. We'll see.
Hi, this is Brooks. Currently my best thing is hiking in wilderness areas with the camera in tow. Locally, that usually means I'm headed to Coxsackie National Forest. Generally, I'm working through areas away from roads and away from park trails. I have to study topographical maps of the areas I plan to hike before I go in. Otherwise, getting lost is a very real possibility, which I've done on a few occasions, and let me tell you, it's very exciting. Working in heavily wooded spaces calls for some pretty extreme wide-angle optics, so I'm always carrying a couple of wide angles into Coxsackie. In the open spaces out west, New Mexico, Colorado, I'll usually carry telephotos. I like the spatial compression you can get with the telephotos. stacking up the folds of the landscape, the clouds in the sky, and I really love the western skies. When I find a productive area, I'll often make several trips back, looking for the right light or good atmospherics. Recently, I brought out my old medium format equipment out of mothballs, and I'm trying to lug all that into really promising spots. But honestly, good photography depends on patient observation and excellent design work much more than any consideration of equipment.
When I'm working on a sculpture, I think about a couple of things. I think about what materials I'm going to use, of course. I need to control the wood, I need to control the brass, but I also need a concept. That's the main thing. So the hardest part of any artist is getting an idea. Where do these ideas come from? Good question. They come from God. You have to be open to a creative idea. For example, in this piece, it's about life and death. But where did this whole look came from? It was a traveling through the Cosachi forest. I saw the trees lined up, and when you saw them in a row, you could see between the trees. When you turned your head, you couldn't see through the trees. It's like rows of corn. And then I'm thinking, how do I use that to give an idea of eternity, of life and death? Well, you can see death sometimes. It hides from you. Sometimes you get a glimpse of the eternal, then it's gone again. So this entire cage, which kind of constrains that idea of life and death, it's glimpses of life and death. It's glimpses of the eternity. Now I relate that to some other symbols. I like to use symbology. I like to use a murder of crows on top here, to kind of get the idea of hovering above this crow skull. That's a sterling silver crow skull. That's a crow egg underneath it. So they're hovering above this encased creature that's already passed on. In the lower levels, I have symbols of life and death. I have seeds, I have sand, I have ashes, I have bones, and all of those are symbols of life or death. And so the entire piece is about eternity, about our mortality. As I get older, mortality, I think about it more and more, because I'm not your age anymore. I'm not 18 or 22. When I was 18 or 22, I didn't think like this. I was going to live forever. But now I think about what's going to happen next. I think about the next phase of my eternity, my life. It has all the elements of the song. So it has the eagle's wings, it has the hands of God, it has eternity, it has the glory of the resurrection. It's all in there. And the materials that I use, they're based on my experience. I used to do a lot of airbrush, so there's an airbrush sky. I like to carve, so I have a carved eagle's skull. I like to use gold leaf, so there's some gold leaf on the skull. I have a collection of dead things, so there's some eagle's wings. I don't have eagle's wings, they're illegal, but I can carve eagle's wings and use them in my sculpture.
These are my pieces for this year's faculty show. It's part of a series I'm working on where I'm really playing around with kind of science and my own strange interpretations of science. I like science, I'm interested in science, and I'm interested in embroidery, so I kind of put them together. These are sort of homages to germs. They're thoroughly made up germs, however, they don't represent real germs. They're just things out of my head, which is interesting. I am trained and in training in a tradition that's has very traditional standards about what should be represented by embroidery, and it's a European tradition. I'm kind of trying to push things in a more American tradition, which is kind of to build in our own direction, our own voice. So I enjoy trying to embroider things that aren't necessarily on the surface a pretty flower or a pretty animal or person, but instead sort of a more molecular take on those subject matters.
I'm mostly drawn toward abstract expressionism and pieces that envelop you. I physically interact with the pieces even though I don't touch them. I feel like they have a physical effect on me. So I use a physical process of felting pieces of paper together so that I'm part of the process myself. I actually get to touch them and make them. I use a process called jumchi, which is Korean paper making, and these pieces, they are very simple, kind of geometric, but I love the physical texture that they have that's created during the process. And I use different thicknesses like tissue paper. Some are decorative ready-made pieces of paper. This one is called What You Have But Do Not Want. It's about the characteristics that you have innately as a person that you don't necessarily find positive, or maybe you don't necessarily find them negative. They're just kind of inconsequential, I guess. And the other piece is piecing it together. So that one is more about creating a sense of self-worth out of odds and ends of how other people see you and what little you can intellectualize about yourself, because the only person you can't see 100% with any accuracy at all is yourself. These two pieces are actually in my most recent show that I had, which were physical representations of a person's self-worth and then the physical changes that it goes through with positive or negative interaction, either from inside yourself or from other people.
The process of felting in paper, is it similar to cloth? Are you using needles?
No, so what I do is I actually have corrugated plastic. It can get as these are actually about the ready-made sizes, but you can go as big as many hands as you have. You soak the paper to the point where it sticks to the plastic, and then whenever you lay down the next layer, it is also soaked with water, so it's like a suction. Then you can just crumple it up, and it actually becomes like cloth. You can actually wet it after it's been fused together, and you can actually pull it apart, and it's like leather. And even though Junchi is Korean paper making, they would use the paper that they felted together as cloth, so it is that durable. They made clothing out of it.
So I'm a designer. I have very well defined the professions between art and design because I went to school and I graduated as a designer in Cuba. So I do work for clients. And sometimes when I use, let's say, kind of like design tools to do some type of work, it's more related to culture and how cultures somehow are changing my life because I'm not from here. So now being in Louisiana, I'm seeing a place that I never experienced before, being like the famous is being in the woods and, you know, being isolated in a small town, you know, those things are kind of something new for me. So I'm interested in see what's happening culturally, socially, and politically. Kind of like Louisiana is trapping a lot of things that put the state behind, even when it's so rich naturally. But also I work for clients, so some of my work is just resolve what they need, you know, give them what they need. This is, for example, a logo design for a company that is placed in Texas. So they have something already started, so I continue the work and I maintain the website and the social media page. And essentially that's what I do, design, and I like to research.
This is part of the same series. This is P Rock in Scotland. It's performed on a reproduction of a 16th century bagpipe chanter and an actual 1800 bagpipe. And it's in the real old style of music. It's got the intervals and the tuning of the bagpipe is not what we consider normal in this day and age, if you consider bagpipe music normal. But the scene, this is the sound of slate at the bottom of the Iowa sky. and it's the mainland over here. But a lot of what I like to do with these works is to sort of treat them in a moody sense, as if they were paintings. And the only real accurate color in the whole piece is right around his face here. The rest of it's treated in different hues and tones. This part of the series are film paintings. I went around the country and did a number of time lapses, and then also tried to create what I thought was a moving painting idea. So that's what this is. In general, the work is just about creating time-based representations. In a similar way, a similar sort of introspective way, I started thinking about things like the rhythm of somebody's heart and then the pattern of their feet. Do you walk in a related rhythm to your heartbeat? So is there a relationship between the time signature of your heartbeat and the time signature of your either walking or running? And that was the sense of the second piece. I was working on a new art car piece, and I'm still working on it, and this wren would show up every day while I was working, and it would just hang out and chirp and talk to me and just kind of mess about. And eventually, in my parts box, car parts in here, she created a nest, and within a really short time she laid eggs, and I put a camera up to do a time lapse over a period of about 3 weeks. And this is sort of the empty nest after she had left. So really all you've got going on is the lighting change. But the birds were just there briefly, and I started thinking about my own children and the idea that children are the ultimate form of art creation and that sort of stuff. So that's what this is about.